Yeah, something I've said before is like being vulnerable is giving the other an opportunity to fall in love with me. And the community at large, the Lamplighters gave so many people the permission to dream. One of the teachings that I received from my teacher Thomas Hubel, which I've repeated so many times, but really speaks to me, is this idea that if I'm walking forever, I have time for now. If I know I'm walking forever, I have time for now. If I know I'm walking forever, I have time for you.
Hi, Yocheved.
Hi.
Welcome to my podcast. So today I have Yocheved Sidof on the podcast. She is a wonderful teacher. She's actually my teacher. I learn with her once a week on Wednesdays, a really beautiful Parsha class on Zoom, which is such a blessing because I am out here in the boondocks in Asheville and there's not a lot of Parsha classes to be had or any Torah classes. So I'm very grateful that I can join one and have such deep, meaningful conversation. And I asked Yocheved to join because this podcast series is called Rest and Reset. And I'll be having a bunch of people who I feel have taken a pause, aka the rest, and has kind of reset in a certain way, and I'm really curious about it and wanted to hear. And sometimes when we rest, it's because we realize we need that, and sometimes it's because either God or the universe is telling us you need to shut down, and that comes in lots of forms. It can come in, twisting an ankle and having to sit, or some project that you're working on needing kind of shuts down around you. And so Yocheved had a really beautiful school that was very celebrated for many years. Let's go a little bit into the background of the school because I don't know much about it. I know that you had a school and I know that people loved it. So if you can just start with a little background of why you created a school and what was going on and how it was meaningful to you.
Sure. And thanks for having me. I love getting to know you deeper and deeper, and I look forward to meaningful conversation as well. So I had been living in Crown Heights for quite a few years at that point, for about 10 years. I had grown up in Chabad in a very small community in the Midwest to immigrant Iranian parents. And so my education was very much infused with a small town feel and small classes and really vibrant Hasidic learning. And it was also infused my own childhood with feelings of not belonging and not quite finding myself in the community in the school that I was in. And a really interesting adventure around identity and belonging and spiritual practice and religion, always spurred with this sense of the mystical truth. Spirituality is really what calls me, and that there's something about creativity and individuality that when it lands and is revered is so amazing. And when it doesn't land and when it's misunderstood, can somehow be a catalyst for pain. And not that the creativity is a catalyst for pain, but the not being seen and felt becomes a catalyst for pain. And so when I moved to New York in the late 90s, I met all these Chabad kids who were amazing and intelligent and creative and entrepreneurial and had not done well in yeshiva and who had been totally spit out by the system and were carrying, yeah,
Like me.
yeah, and we're carrying all this pain. And now the zeitgeist is that we're all into healing and trauma and what's my story and what's your story. But 25 years ago, a lot of this language wasn't really around, 30 years ago. And so it felt like we were much more rooted in our trauma in many ways. And that brought me a lot of heartache. Like, how is it that all these kids like me who received such a gift in the Hasidic community also in some way feel dejected and misunderstood? And when I had my first child, my son, I projected a lot of my own fears onto him. I experienced him as this young, vivacious, creative, out of the box kid. And I've done a lot of work around this since, but at the time, I sort of projected like he is going to have a really hard time in the system. He's not going to make it. He's going to be pushed out. And I can't let that happen to my son. Like, I can't let my vibrant, creative child not find a home within spiritual community. And I met a like-minded educator. I was able to rally some very trusting entrepreneurial families, and we
Mhm.
started Lamplighters Yeshiva in 2010. And we had a very articulated, soul-based vision of a community that really honored the individuality and the learning potential of every child, and that creating an environment where children have choices, where they're encouraged to be their whole selves, was not in any which way a contradiction to religious, spiritual education. In fact, it was a compliment. It was an inherent compliment.
Yocheved, I absolutely, first of all, love your vision of your school because
Mm.
as somebody who grew up in the Chabad system and the Hasidic system, as someone who is extremely creative and out of the box, it really did feel like if you were this creative and different stylistic person, that there wasn't a place where like Chabad, Hasidus, or spirituality and Judaism really connected, which was
Mhm.
very confusing as a child because in my home, like, my parents, most people do know my parents. Whoever doesn't, my parents are what we call like Hasidic hippies. So they were very much these creative, different, very out of the box. I was very embarrassed as a child of them and then grew to appreciate them. But so at home, I had this message of like, you can be Jewish and creative and weird and interesting and fun and exotic. But then you'd go to school and there was none of that. And I love that you had this vision of creating that for children because it's so important. It's so
Yeah,
important.
so important. Yeah. And I think what was really special about Lamplighters is that, and you use the word that we were celebrated, and I really appreciate that because we really were celebrated. It became this community, not just for the kids, but the parents and the teachers and the staff and the donors and the community at large. Like Lamplighters gave so many people the permission to dream.
Mm,
And dream for their own kids and to dream for their younger child that didn't get what they needed, right? And
yeah.
to dream for the community, like what might it look like for Chabad or Crown Heights or the Jewish world at large, because we definitely touch lots of parts of the community to start thinking and doing different. And so it really became like this movement for change and this movement for imagination. And so I never felt like I was running a school, even though education was obviously very much a huge part of it. I really
Yeah.
felt like I was part of this contagious movement that was alive and vibrant, and that people wanted us to succeed because it meant something for them personally if we would
Right,
succeed.
right. Wow. I feel like that movement is still alive
Mm,
very much. And I do think you have a big part of it. So you start the school, it's clearly a big idea that we had this void in the community, and you're basically filling a very, very, very large void. And it sounds like the families were into it and the schooling was into it. So I know you don't have your school anymore
yeah.
and it was shut down. So tell us a little bit of that process and what happened, because clearly it was very close to your heart. So it's something that I assume you were hoping to keep doing long term.
Yeah, I mean, it was more than close to my heart. It was my whole life. It was my identity. It was my calling. It was,
Mm,
I mean, anybody who knew me then knew me as Yocheved from Lamplighters. It was just like one word. It wasn't even. And I feel like I've been asked this many, many times over the course of the last few years, like kind of what went wrong or like what happened, and first of all, I'm one person with one perspective, and everyone will have their perspective on what made it magical and also what contributed to it closing. I'll say that it wasn't just like we woke up one morning and we closed the doors, and it wasn't that we didn't have enough money. I mean, money was obviously part of it, but how one gets to a place of not having enough is
mhm,
complex and long, and there's multiple factors that contribute to that. But it was a combination of many, many things, and I could probably write books on what needs to go right and what can go wrong in the entrepreneurial phase. But ultimately, in 2020, June of 2020, after I would say it was 2 years of like really, really trying to keep it alive and raising a lot of money and raising public awareness and moving into a new building and dealing with lots of internal struggles and leadership shifts and different kinds of things like that. It was very, very, very challenging. It felt like I was going through a gruesome death in many ways,
mm,
and it was quite public, and there was lots of assumptions, and I definitely feel like I carried a lot of the sadness and shame in the public arena as well. And it closed in 2020 during COVID. And so there was just this tsunami of grief, is how I describe it, of really coming to the finality of this place that we have been nurturing for so long, that all my children are in this school, that my whole life, my whole identity, my religious practice, my community, my soul, my standing everything is somehow connected. And these beautiful kids, like we had so many gorgeous, amazing, intelligent, vibrant students and their families. So yeah, my intention was that the school would continue. Mind you, I was totally burnt out, very unhealthy, had my fifth child, and was working 5 minutes later, like literally,
Right.
but I was in it for the long haul. So if my school had not been closed, like all of the forces that came to play for that
Yeah,
to be the right decision, I probably would still
be there.
be there. Yeah, I would probably still be there in some form or another. Yeah.
So would you say that it was more of a forced closing? Like, were you at a place where there was just no way you could keep it going? Or did you decide, you know what, for my sanity, my health, I need to shut this down?
I would say there was a moment where I felt like I would better serve the school, not in the daily grind, and I would put my energies towards trying to fundraise out of this huge financial hole that we were in. And I think that was my way of saying, okay, I need to find a healthier relationship with this school.
Yeah.
And even that felt like, was it fully my choice? Was it something that I felt like I had to do for other reasons, you know? But I mean, there was a time where I tried everything. Like I was literally obsessed with saving this. I went from obsessed to running the school to saving the school. And so it definitely felt like I was forced.
Hmm.
I mean like just that life sometimes happens in a way where it feels like there's no
There's no choice.
choice. Yeah, and eons and eons and eons of very hard work to get to a point of really feeling like that there was a gift here in the closing, even in the way that it closed, even though it was so incredibly painful. Yeah.
I do want to talk about that, but before we get to the gift part,
Hmm.
I want to talk about something that I feel you're open to speaking about that I think is very, very difficult for most people. And that all the feelings that came once the school closed, right? You were talking about how there was like so much shame, and I can imagine you put so much into it to begin with, and in it, and in the moments, and in those years. And then also the public, right? You were serving the community. So much of the public community, of the people who were part of your school, but then the larger public community, you know, living where you live, you're in a very tight knit community. Everyone kind of knows each other's business. Everyone talks a lot. Everyone makes assumptions a lot. And so when one has to go through something like that, like, what does that feel like? And
Hmm.
how do you deal with that while still being in the community and not running away?
Well, I just want to say that the grief doesn't go away. You know, I still move through pockets of profound grief. And there's anger. There was a lot of anger also. I felt very abandoned. I felt abandoned.
Abandoned by,
I felt abandoned within the school in different ways, and I felt abandoned by the community. Like I had this fantasy that if only we could raise this much or we could do this much, and like where was the community support?
uh-huh.
And in many ways there was a lot of support, and in many ways there wasn't. You know, I still meet people who wish that a school like ours was around, and I think that this is that balance between individual agency and communal agency. It's like, could the Crown Heights community have rallied to save a school that was servicing so many kids? Like perhaps, and yet in many ways they were supportive and donated to our campaigns and cared. And so, you know, because it was not one thing,
Hmm.
it was a very self-serving momentary indulgence to imagine that there was somebody or something else that was to blame or that could have saved. But my personal feeling of what I went through was just tremendous loss and grief. And I had built so much, and so much of my identity was connected with this. And I never knew if I could ever build something again. Like, would I ever
Wow.
work again? Would I ever would anyone care about me the same way now that I wasn't doing something so important for the
Mhm.
community? Were other people holding, anger toward me and yeah, so there was a lot of fear and anger and hurt and also the sense of I'm done. I'm just done. I'm done. I'm done. Like, and I still say, like, the part of me is done. Like, I would not never walk into a paradigm like that again of like complete, it's such a complex system. Schools are so complex, communities are
Yeah.
so complex, change within communities are so complex. And now I would much rather be a solopreneur in certain ways. Uh,
Solopreneur.
but,
I love it.
but yeah, it was, and also, I mean, I
Mm.
believe we've spoken about this. I at the same time was moving through something quite profound on the family level with one of my kids. So
Right.
it wasn't only the loss of lamplighters, it was loss of innocence in other ways as well.
Mm.
So it was a very, very, very dark time. And also, and again, this is where the shadow and the light are
Yeah.
so connected because, I only stepped foot into therapy because the pressure and the stress, I mean, I was under an enormous amount of pressure, was building up with lamplighters. This was like, I think 2019.
Hmm.
And I walked into therapy and I was like, I need help because I think this is all about to fall apart and I'm nothing without this place. Like I'm going. And in the paradigm of that therapeutic structure, it was like, oh, and by the way, I suffered from sexual assault, and oh, by the way, here's my trauma response. And here is all the ways in which I people please and fawn and have a hard time saying no and get caught up in codependent dynamics and how all that spilled out into the school. And so, it was really me being in the muck of my shadow that allowed me to start feeling like what's at play here. It's not just an organization that I started that now is failing. Like there's all these ingrained patterns in me that are a culmination of some really hard times that are also at play here. How
Mm.
can I start to discern like my work that is my work independent of where I work, right?
Right. It's so interesting that you bring up the identity thing within therapy and how it sounds like, and this makes sense for most people I talk to, like their identity is wrapped up in what they're doing instead of who
Mhm,
they're being,
mhm.
right? And especially when you have a business so large that is a huge stressor that involves a ton of people, it's your whole identity. And then you forget that your identity is also what happened to you and who you are and where you
Mm,
are, and that you get to take all of that and
yeah.
move forward. And what a blessing that you figured out you needed to step into therapy, because you probably got whatever you needed from there so that when your school did go under, you had at least some tools and it wasn't a complete.
Yeah, I mean, my therapist at the time then, I mean, at some point I was in therapy twice a week and in somatic therapy once a week. I mean, kind of what happened in parallel to the school starting to close and my child's particular challenge. And it was just like all of these things that came together that really propelled me on a very, very deep dive inside. And my therapist then, who I'm still in contact with, like I could not have walked through that part of my life if not for her. I could cry. Like she was so with me at that time. And but and both of my therapists, one of them I'm still with now, like so with me in that time. And we think we go through these traumas in life or these like really big shatterings and it's behind us. It's not like what you're saying, they continue to walk with us. And so having still relational spaces where when that stuff comes up again, because it does, it's
Right.
cyclical. It's not like, oh, that was then. It's like, okay, no. Here it is now. And here it is now. Here it is now. And I think, therapy, I mean, and there's different kinds of therapy, and I do believe some kinds are more effective than other kinds. And life becomes therapeutic, like life itself is healing when we attune to it. It is a lifesaver. Like I really do not believe I would have been able to make it through that without kind of support that I had. And also my husband was and is a tremendous partner and support. And there were people in my life who had to very strongly remind me that I am much more than what I did and
Yeah.
that what I did continues to live on, which we, the Lamplighters community, built something magical together, and it continues to live on. And this shift that you're alluding to of like moving from the doing to being has really been what I think this is kind of what you're moving into the rest that you're speaking of, really a function of being. And it doesn't mean we shut down. There's so much activity in rest, right? And for me, that movement of my self-worth is connected to what I do, is how flashy and sparkly, is how known, and then just moving much more to like there is, I call it the isness. There's an isness that is beyond what I produce. And I feel that the moving from doing to being was one particular shift, which took a lot of time and rewiring, and still is something I'm working with. And then moving from the being to the being with, which is building and nurturing community, and in the horizontal plane, but also in the vertical plane, like with God and also with the other, where there's a sense of being with. Can I be with you and witness you as we walk in life? Can you be with? And the same thing with the divine. To feel that Hashem is with me, independent of what I'm doing, is with me. And so these moments of profound grief and shame and loss become profound points of feeling that being with energy. Like, wow, I'm not alone.
Those profound moments of loss and grief, to be able to look at it and say, I'm not alone. This is where I'm actually getting a connection, right? I feel like you have to be at a certain place to be able to do that. When you're in those moments of grief with anger or grief on your own, it's really hard to reach that. And I think you mentioning that, having this therapy walking you through it, having your husband's support walking you through it, I think that's really important. And I just kind of want to reiterate that. We need support. We really need support in this life, in whatever form we can get it. If therapy, I'm a big therapy advocate. But even if you feel for whatever reason you can't do it, you can't afford it, where can you connect with yourself and God, right? And where can you connect with the other? Who can be a support for you to get you to that place of shutting down and grief and trauma and public shame into this like restful state of being? And I guess my question to you is like, how did you make that transition? Was it the therapy support? Was it something that you were like, okay, now I need to move into a healing process? Like, how did you start your healing journey?
I have a lot of feelings around the words healing journey. I use them myself as well, but the healing journey doesn't begin or end anywhere, right?
True, and you're correct, and I get your
And
feeling.
I totally get the
But the
question.
reason I'm asking is because this, if it was just a conversation between me and you, like you wouldn't have to share or explain. But the point of this is that my hope is that someone who needs to hear it will hear it. And so I am very into action space. And I think that sharing actionable measures is really important for people who are stuck and need to hear. And this is what
I would say like two things. One thing is to find your community of like-minded people, even if it's just two or three. Something really powerful in witnessing and being witnessed. It's no accident that the words that are used to describe the congregation of Israel is Adat Yisrael, which is the same language as Aid, which means to witness. Something that happens in communal spaces where we elicit the possibility for witnessing, which is very powerful. So I would say practically like pivoting into a journey that is really about healing or bringing more attunement to self is like, are there two or three people in my life that I can perhaps be with a little bit more vulnerably than I am when I show up in the world? And maybe it's reaching out for a conversation. Maybe it's a, hey, do you mind listening? But it's somehow finding ourselves in paradigms. And again, community can also be one-on-one. Doesn't have to be thousands of people. Communities also can be relational space, but just to be felt. I feel you feeling me. That's very, very powerful. And it doesn't have to be fancy therapy or like an Instagram influencer with thousands of people it can be just like a trusted relationship with somebody who's like, I'm here. And that can be very powerful. And a springboard for attuning us to the power of that medicine of like, witnessing and being witnessed. And then the other practical thing I would say, which at around the same time, again, God gives us the medicine before the
Disease.
wounding, before the wound is, at that point I was studying Jewish meditation for quite some time, and meditative practice, spiritual practice. Can I sit with myself for 5 minutes? I don't have to have huge spiritual experience. I don't have to meet God at Sinai, but can I just like be with myself and with whatever arises? And there's something that happens when I meet myself with no strings attached. There's a particular muscle that's built. There's a deeper knowing that I matter independent of what I do. And if we can really see ourselves in a journey that is unfolding over time, and I mean time, then we can create space for the little step really mattering. I feel like a lot of the conditioning is transformation has to be fast and radical and obvious, right?
Yeah.
And everyone has to see it and everyone has to know it. I have to tell
Just
everybody
see it.
about
And then we
it.
make sure everyone knows it's happening.
Everyone needs to know. When I have one insight, everyone needs to know, right? And it's like, but wait, 1 second, like the little steps.
Mm.
So that would be my practical offering.
I think that's so beautiful and I love it and so, so practical. And what I'm hearing really is that two really powerful ways of healing through it is connection with the other and connection with yourself.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels that we're in this world for a connection to other, connection to self, connection to God. And I do feel that when we are feeling so alone and not seen, that's where the sadness and shame really comes in. And to move through that is to reach out. And I love the way you said that, texting a friend and saying, will you listen, right? Because how do you start being vulnerable with somebody when you're not comfortable with it or used to it? Yeah, just listen, see me. It gives us so much. Like, I have an easier time being vulnerable than most. So it's to my benefit. But when you are, it just gives you so much. And then you can go to meditation and feel really seen by yourself.
Yeah, something I've said before is like being vulnerable is giving the other an opportunity to fall in love with me.
Oh, that's so poetic. I love that.
Mhm.
That's beautiful
Yeah.
and true.
But when we fall in love, right? When we actually encounter humanity, we really find ourselves in love,
Mm,
right? So when we really can feel like the depth of someone's human,
yeah,
and that usually happens when we open up.
that's right. Okay, so yeah, healing journey is a lifetime. So it keeps going and going. But you were talking earlier about the closing of your school and the way it happened, that you realized it was a gift. Can
Mhm.
we talk about that and like how it led you to where you are now?
So first, just having so much space to be bored. I had not had space for so long. I'm not saying that I always did something amazing with the space that I had. Just even being able to have a day where there was space in my day was one layer of like the gift. Like, oh wait, what happens when I actually can like system gets to relax a little bit? It's uncomfortable. I'm so used to being so busy.
Right.
There's just something that happened over time when I was forced to just have space in my day. And at the same time, the grief of losing the school and my own grief and my child that was moving through something really dark, and of course we were in COVID and all of these things, and I'm the kind of person who's always in some kind of training. I'm just like, this is kind of how I am. So I found myself learning from a tremendous teacher who's in the realm of psychosomatic mystical healing of trauma. And I enlisted, at that point, I had done a year of a therapeutic coaching program that was not for me. I was in this space of rediscovering parts of myself that kind of were pushed away because of my focus on work. And one
Wow.
of the things that emerged was I've always been deeply fascinated by what makes us tick as people. Like, how do we become who we are? And healing. And the combination of the Jewish meditation, I was learning with Daniel Katz, and then I was in this therapeutic coaching program, and then I came upon Tubal, and that really was like a huge opening for me. And so deepening in my own trauma healing work, it was very messy. It is really hard in such a collective, warm, radical kind of community that made space for the divine, the mystical within the therapeutic work was just a huge paradigm shift for me. and still being in therapy and still being a loving family and also exploring other modalities like plant medicine and deepening my meditation and enjoying life also.
Yeah.
Suddenly had, and this is again where I give thanks to my husband, I suddenly felt like a permission to enjoy life in a different way. And I still, even with all of this, I still came to this place of like, I probably will never start anything again.
Mm.
Probably will never really work again in the same way that I did. I still really held on to that narrative that I'm kind of a one-hit wonder and that was it, you know?
Like, I
And so
can't do it.
yeah, I can't great. I have all this space and I'm learning more about myself and I'm cultivating skills and I'm you know, I'm starting to teach. I was teaching at that point as well. But and then it was like it was just all these gifts started really flowing through of really, understanding that I was walking with this narrative that I hold a lot of power, but my power is scary. Somehow there's this contract that I've signed that I need to play small in some ways. I need to hold back and I don't deserve to be fully actualized. Maybe there was a part of me that was punishing myself even.
Yeah.
And there was a real radical shift this past summer. And at that point, I had already started OMEC. OMEC is it's a spiritual community that I founded and lead. And we say that it's a place for people to pursue deeper meaning and to pursue deeper ways of being in life. And we purchased 60 acres in upstate, which we are in the middle of renovation for a retreat center, which really brings this interface of spiritual practice and deep healing. And
First of all, that's incredible. I just say, okay,
thank you.
it's incredible.
Yeah.
Second, I'm very excited. I've already told you this privately, but I can't wait to join for one of the retreats when it's ready because
Oh, I can't wait for you to come.
are my thing and I love them. And what a way for you to come from this place of like, I need to play small. I'm a one-hit wonder. I love that you said you were punishing yourself. I think a lot of us do that. Like, I had my opportunity. I
Screwed up.
messed it up. I totally screwed up. I don't deserve to be big again. I don't deserve
Yeah.
to step into my power again. And so how did you get from not deserving to, oh, let's purchase 60 acres of land upstate and we're going to be doing retreats?
Yeah, it's interesting. A few things. First, I want to say that OMEC, I was very, very committed to moving slow, and I still really am. It's slowly developing. It's slowly, like, I feel very strongly that organizations have their own soul. And as founders and active members, we attune to the soul of the organization. Lamplighter's soul was very, very loud and obvious to me from the get-go. OMIC is more modest. But it's really beautiful because I'm getting to know this evolutionary spirit and I'm committed to moving slow, and it just feels amazing. It feels like part of the gift of the forced rest is this embracing of moving slow. I don't have anything to prove, and this is evolving. And so the Malava Malkas and the Minyanim, and me really stepping into myself as like a spiritual teacher. And it's like step by step, there's no rushing. And it just feels so nice. So that's one piece of it is like the honoring of the slow pace, which by the way, it's not even slow, it's just the pace that it is, right?
Right.
Even slow and fast is a judgment. It's not actually slow, it's just the pace that it is and not trying to force anything has been really. And I think one of the pivots was I had this really profound experience in the summer and I was in a very deep state and it was actually induced through brainwave therapy. It was really and neurofeedback. And I was in this very, very deep space. And I just came to this knowing, like it's now like in my bones and in my flesh of like when we're given a mission in this world and we each have a mission. We're in nobody's service if we hide from our mission. It doesn't serve anybody if we hide from what we're here to do. And what we're here to do is not a value judgment, it just is. And I just felt like I have one boss. My boss is the creator, and I'm here to serve. And ain't nobody got time for like other stuff, like
the drama that I'm creating in my head.
Like that's not, and it just was such a. And again, it doesn't mean I'm forcing or trying to construct or hustle, or it still feels very much like this energy of being with, but it's like in service, and it's like, yeah, like just stripping away the noise. And so I'm actually really excited for the first time in a very long time about this work and OMEC and this community that we're building together, and the way that we're very much still within the orthodox space, but like I do, kind of pushing certain boundaries. And
Yeah.
and for example, we're having Purim at our house in a few days, and I'm going to be reading the Megillah, and it's just
I
like,
heard. That's so incredible.
yeah, and I feel so excited by an opportunity to just to serve in that way. And there's the healing circles and the presencing circles, and there's the teachings, and there's the private sort of more like spiritual guidance and mentorship, and then there's like the Friday night minyanim in our home that like move from meditation to singing to chicken soup and deep conversation.
And
And
again, the theme of connection with others.
yeah,
It's
so
it's also beautiful. First of all, for anyone listening, I will be tagging Yocheved so you can join all the things she's doing. It's really, really beautiful. For those who are not in New York, she gives classes online on Zoom. As I said, I go to them and I highly recommend it. And also for those who are lucky enough to be in New York, you can join the Friday nights and the Purims and the Malava Malkas, and then the retreats one day. I love hearing the excitement in your voice. Like you can literally hear the joy and excitement. It's so powerful to hear this story and I'm so glad I'm talking to you now when
yeah,
you're already like have stepped into your new thing.
yeah,
Because I feel like the conversation about resting or being forced to rest, in quotes, as we say, is always only half the story, right? Then what happens? What are you using with that time and space? Like you said, you were bored, like bored in a good way. Like you had time to be bored. And when you're bored, your mind goes. And then with the meditation and all of it, and it's such a beautiful journey. And you stepping into this, like, because I think we all, even those who haven't done something so loud, like creating school or a business that's really big, I think most of us have this resistance to stepping into our power. I consider myself a very confident person. Thankfully, I grew up with really great values and inspiration, and yet still, like, there's just this fear of like, what if I'm big? And to hear, I think it's so important that people who are listening, people who want to do that, who have this big resistance to it, can hear someone like you who maybe they're watching from afar and they're like, oh, she did her school and obviously she's doing OMEC because she knows what she's doing and she knows how to create things. It's everyone has these feelings.
yeah,
Everyone has these feelings. And like you said, they don't go away. They come with you. You
yeah,
just decide to put them in the back seat and you be
yeah,
the driver.
yeah,
And your new way of doing it too, like doing it slowly, organically. It doesn't have to be a rush. You don't
right.
have to make a decision where you have this, and now it's out there and everyone can, it's between you and yourself and you and God and you and your community. And then you're able to like expand.
Yeah. Then it's honest.
And
It's
then it's honest.
grounded and it's compassionate. And one of the teachings that I received from my teacher Thomas Hubel, which I've repeated so many times, it really speaks to me, is this idea that if I'm walking forever, I have time for now. If I know I'm walking forever, I have time for now. If I know I'm walking forever, I have time for you. And I think part of the wounding of living in society is that we're mesmerized by outcome, and we're mesmerized by like the rush and the hustle.
Mm,
We forget that we're walking forever, not just one lifetime. So then I have time for you, right? I have time for this. I have time for this moment that might be really, really hard and where I might be crumbling. And in fact, I trust that the crumbling is in service of the walk. Crumbling is in service of a bigger story that I don't see, that I thankfully don't see,
yeah.
something bigger than my own perception. And what a beautiful, sometimes very painful surrender that can invite.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I love that quote.
Yeah.
We're walking forever.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yocheved, thank you so much for being here and joining this conversation. It's really powerful. Thank think it'll service a lot of people who are listening, who are either in those moments of crumbling. And it's a really good reminder to know that even in those moments, to like be able to pause and be like, for my greater self, I don't know how, I don't know where, I don't know what, but to be able to trust and really surrender.
Yeah.
Surrender that it'll come. And you don't need to know what's next. I think just moving forward brings you to the.
Yeah. And can I feel God's care for me in the here and now, care for in this moment? And then when I feel cared for, I suddenly can relax into that, right? This is whatever is happening, whether it's a forced rest or it's a whatever's happening in our life. Like, can I feel that this is an act of care by the universe? And then I can rest into that. I can really rest.
Really rest. And everyone needs it and everyone deserves it.
Yes.
You deserve to rest. You deserve it. Part of why we're here, and that's how you get into your being. So beautiful. Well, thank you for joining me today. I am so excited about all of the Omic stuff. As I said, I'm going to be the first one signing up for those retreats. I saw the land. I'm very excited. I'm going to bring my journal. And I love watching your journey. I love being a part of it. And thank you for sharing it with the world.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and being with me.
Of course.